Good morning, and thank you all for joining us for today's webcast, Neuron ESB Tips and Tricks Live Product Demo, presented by Marty Wasznicky. My name is Meredith Mead, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for Neudesic and the moderator for today's webcast. This webcast is presented by Marty Wasznicky, Neudesic's Director of Business Development. We are very excited to have him present for us this morning. If you are all logged on, you should be able to see the title slide that states Neuron ESB Tips and Tricks Product Demo. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the session by typing them in. To ask a question, click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar on the top left side of your screen. Type your question, then click the Ask button. Please note all questions will be held until the end. We will also be using the screenshot feature within Live Meeting. Changing your feedback color within this tool provides feedback to the presenter. To provide feedback, click on the feedback menu found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Select your feedback color. Your seat in the conference center will display your selected color. Lastly, this webcast is being recorded and will be available via the Neudesic website. We will email you the link when it is available. If everyone is ready, please make sure your seat color is green. At this time, I'd like to turn our presentation over to Marty.
Well, hello everyone. Good morning. Thank you for coming to this webcast. This is tips and tricks for Neuron ESB. This is assuming that there's folks out there, you have customers using the product today, they're using it quite effectively, but there's always little things you can do to make life easier with our product and to gain some more functionality and capability. A little bit about myself. Director of Business Development here at Neudesic. I've been here for about 3 years now. I worked on the development side, worked on the business side. Before that, came from Microsoft and spent 6 years trying to build out integration solutions for customers, fix their issues, and even work on the product at Microsoft. So all fun. Been doing integration, this kind of work for almost 20 years now. And the best thing about this kind of work, it's always challenging. It is fun. So, some of the things I wanted to cover today. Real briefly, Neuron ESB, what is it? I'm sure everyone does know, but we'll just hit that lightly. But some of the things I'm going to cover, WCF line of business adapters. These are things released by Microsoft. Microsoft obviously produces some of the WCF line of business adapters out there, but they also provide a framework and an SDK that allows you to build these. These adapters offer some unique capabilities, and it's kind of nice. You'll see how we natively support this within Neuron. Pretty easy to use as well. Arguably easier to use in our product than any other product out there. Then we'll go over some interesting things that you can do with pipelines, and really what you can do, how you can drive some metadata around, and use these things with web services. Then we're going to cover just some little things, tidbits with web services itself, and then some common troubleshooting techniques. Then we'll open it up for Q&A. Now, first of all, Neuron ESB. Neuron ESB, at the end of the day, we are an integration server, a web service router, and intermediary. We really simplify the integration and messaging problem for our customers. Our goal is to allow the normal, everyday .NET developer to be incredibly effective at doing their job without having to build a lot of redundant infrastructure and services. Most of our customers tend to bootstrap themselves because we've striven to make the product easy to use. And that's really our hallmark. Some of the things that we provide to the platform: low latency messaging, an integration framework, adapters, and infrastructure, native web service support, being able to provide that services gateway for our customers to handle things like protocol and message mediation and routing. More event-based product integration, a topic-based pub subsystem, more so tools and an API that are just easy to use by developers. This diagram is really just a diagram to show the interconnectivity, how you can connect with Neuron, to Neuron, receive messages from, submit messages to, whether it's through our distributed client API, hosted in your own .NET application, or through WCF bindings, web services, ASMX, through our own adapters, through your custom adapters, or through WCF line of business adapters, or even our event-based plugins. It's very easy to interact with a bus through a topic-based pub subsystem. So, highlight again some of the things we're going to cover. The adapters, pipelines, services, and troubleshooting. First in line, the WCF line of business adapters. Now, Microsoft produces the BizTalk Adapter Pack. Now, you can purchase this separately from BizTalk. In fact, you can use these with SharePoint, SQL Server, other products, and even your own .NET code. Consequently, you can actually use these very well within Neuron. And as I said earlier, I'd argue the experience is probably much better within Neuron because we don't have a lot of requirements that, say, most of the other Microsoft products have. We don't force you or require you to compile the schemas and WSDLs and do assemblies, make a lot of tight references. Very easy to configure and use, and we'll show you that today. Nice thing about these adapters, they provide metadata harvesting. There will be times where you'll want to validate the message against a schema, or you'll need to map from one format to another. By being able to provide metadata for you, makes life a little easier. And adapters, of course, provide that integration through configuration experience. Well, and there's mapping as well. Now, with everything, there's always a few interesting tidbits with using any third-party technology. So I'm going to show you what some of those are. Give me a moment, and I'm going to share. I think I'm just going to share my whole desktop. Here we go. So what you see before you is the Neuron ESB Explorer. If you're using Neuron today, this is going to be very familiar to you. This is our administration tool. This is where you spend most of your time. As you can see, I have a topic defined. A topic, actually, with a couple of subtopics. A changed and a back end. Now, I did this specifically underneath the covers. Everything is moved through Neuron to a topic-based pub subsystem. So our adapters will either be submitting information to these subtopics, or we'll be sending information to those subtopics to be forwarded to the adapter itself. Not a lot of magic here. I'm just using TCPS network. Nothing else added. Notice I have a publisher, an on-ramp. I'm going to show you two aspects to, say, the BizTalk SQL adapter, the WCF line of business adapter for SQL Server. I'll show you how you can actually monitor a database and publish that information into Neuron so that other subscribers can get it. And then I'll also show you how to send updates out, how you can update a database or actually request information from a database. So hence I have a subscriber. Now, the nice thing with the pub subsystem, it's easy for me to add new subscribers to the system. And I'm just going to say, fantastic, I want to subscribe to everything. I'll hit apply, and I'll hit OK. The old save button. Great. Now, how you set this up is very easy. Under connections, most people are familiar with this, you have the ability to import services, use our adapters, use custom adapters, create custom bindings, and then create either service or adapter endpoints from those elements. If I look under adapters, what I've done, I've created 3 adapter instances, or actually 3 adapters, using the WCF line of business adapter. Each one is configured slightly differently. So let me go through this. How you do this is simply hit New, give it a name, and notice if the family is .NET. That means these are the adapters that ship with Neuron, or these are custom adapters that you've created using our interface. If I select WCF, you'll notice I have a few more tabs here. And now it'll actually show you all the WCF line of business adapters that may be installed on your machine. Notice I installed the BizTalk adapter pack, so now I have the Oracle DB, the Oracle EBS, SAP, and SQL. If I select one of these bindings, notice what happens. If I go to the bindings property, I have all the attributes I can fill out. Everything that's supported. If I'm going to be polling, in other words, publishing information in the bus, I can pick the type of polling operations that the SQL adapter supports. Polling, notification, type polling, and XML. We'll actually play with XML and type polling today. If you're using notifications, you can put your statement in. An availability statement is usually, hey, if something meets this criteria, then go ahead and execute the polling statement. That polling statement can be a stored proc, can be a select statement, a number of different things. Once you fill this out, you can add connection properties. Now the connection properties are strictly to import metadata on the metadata tab. You'll find that these won't be used later. You can actually insert these into a URI in a service connector, and we'll show you how to do that. And then being able to browse the metadata. So let me go to like this. We'll go to one I already have configured. You'll notice here, this isn't polling at all. This is going to allow you to send and receive information from a database. I have some basic connection information. And if I select metadata browse, it'll bring up the metadata generator. I can see the stored procs in the database. It's configured for it. Say get entry by ID. I can add that, hit it. And this will generate schemas for me, importing them into Neuron. And if I go into data now, I can see XML schemas. Now, what can you use these schemas for? You can use them for mapping, and you can use them for validation. We don't require you to compile these into assemblies or do anything else with them. It'll always be useful information. Since you're using our services, the action name is something that you'll need. So once you've created these, you're ready to create a service endpoint. Now, if you don't want to configure something through this, for whatever reason, if you don't want to use the UI, you can always create a custom binding. That can be used as well. I have a custom binding defined here. For the SQL WCF line of business adapter. If I go back into connections, create a custom binding, you'll notice it just has all the options that you're configuring in where? The binding UI. So that's another way to do it. And obviously, the nice thing about creating custom bindings is just that. You can create custom bindings and use those for other services. Perhaps I want to use HTTP with binary encoding. Let's do an HTTP binary binding. Fantastic. There we go. under message encoding. Using the HTTP transport. And we'll close the binding. And we'll close this. Pretty simple. And I can just call this HTTP binary. And I can reuse this later if I need to. Now, the only things I really need, though, is to create my SQL WCF adapter bindings to the adapter section. In this case, this will represent our one-way. In this case, these are polling bindings. And if you take a look at the properties, all I've done here is I've said, I'm going to use XML polling. Here's my availability statement. And here's what it needs to execute, the stored proc. In this other case, you'll notice I'm just using a select statement, and I'm saying this is a typed polling, which means the SQL adapter will basically bring me back its version of XML and the schema. Fantastic. So I've created these. The next thing to do is just create a service endpoint. And this is where using the line of business adapters in Neuron is a little different than using the Neuron adapters. If you were using a Neuron adapter, let me show you. Say new, and I want to create an MQ series adapter. Fantastic. Pick MQ series, or let's go down here. Hit apply. What I would do if I wanted to use an MQ series adapter, I would create an adapter endpoint. I would pick the MQ series adapter. I would pick the mode it supported. I would associate it with a publisher or subscriber. And then I would fill out its properties, which queue to monitor, things of that nature. Now, let me go back up here, remove this. WCF line of business adapters are inherently web services, or services, so to speak. So we really create service endpoints with these. So notice I have several created. If I take a look at the SQL WCF service here, I'm using this binding. Now this binding, SQL WCF adapter, is what I created under the connection methods under the adapter leaf. Notice they're all here. But notice this HTTP binary, this custom binding I created. It's here too. So notice out of the box we support basic HTTP, REST, WSHTTP, Federation, NetHTTP, and NetMSMQ. But Neuron really supports any binding through WCF because you can create your own. And then it becomes available. When you add the WCF line of business adapters, those bindings become available here. Under binding, I have it set for request reply. It could be either a datagram or request reply. But in this scenario, I'm going to show you how to make requests to the back-end SQL Server. Hence, we have a service connector configured. And notice the URL. Now, how you configure this is actually well documented in the BizTalk adapter pack help file. It's always a server and a database. And notice the subscriber ID, and it's using the default policy. Now, to send information to this, the database I'm using is the database that we document. We give you a script for it in the Neuron help file under the SQL how-to sample. So if I go into SQL Server, you'll see that it's a SQL adapter service how-to, simple database, has the 3 stored procs, has the 1 table phone book, so going back here, what we're going to do now is simply query that for information. Now, the best way to do this is we created a test subscriber, so let's go ahead and launch a test client. I'll go ahead and connect to that test client. Here we are, connect. And notice I can send and receive on back end, changed. Great. So I'm going to send a message to back end because why? We have that adapter, that service endpoint, subscribing to this subtopic. So very important to remember, we always map services to topics or subtopics. So to come back here again, I have this service endpoint associated with this subscriber, sub-SQL WCF, and if I look at that subscriber, it's going to be able to listen and receive all messages published to the SQL Facade backend topic. So, what should I send? Go ahead and close this, bring up my other test client. What should I send? Well, this is going to be a request reply, so I'll change my semantics to request. I have some samples here. Let's try a select statement first. You'll find that these formats are all well documented in the BizTalk Adapter Pack. In this case, I'm going to run a select statement. I'm basically going to say, give me the row where ID equals 1. And it's always table op DBO phone book. The key here is I need the action. Now, I just so happened I stored that in here as well. No action, you'll definitely get an error. So now if I send this, I should receive the response message from this database, or actually the database adapter, and I should receive it and it should be written here. I'll go ahead and send, and notice I got my response. ID 1, first, last name. Now, if I wanted instead, let's run this stored procedure. Here we go. The action is slightly different. Let's put that in. Now we'll send, receive the message, and notice a little different. I get the schema back, and I get the message. So fairly easy to use the SQL line of business adapters, and they all function fairly the same way. So you can do inserts, updates, deletes, you can run stored procs, you can do anything against the database, and now the database, what is it? It's represented by a service endpoint. Now, what if I wanted to publish information from the database into Neuron? Well, that's actually pretty easy as well. I have these already created. They're disabled though. I could do something fairly easy. XML from SQL. Let's use our publish XML finding that we created earlier. This is just going to be a one-way poll. So we'll call this the datagram. There's no security on this. This is essentially a web service hosted by Neuron now. So we'll enable the client connector. This is going to be the on-ramp. It'll be published to the changed topic. And the URL will be MSSQL. Again, these are pretty well documented. Localhost equal adapter service. How to. That's the URL. So, pretty easy. If I have that set up, I should be able to hit save. Fantastic. I think we have an adapter. I can go into activity under endpoint health. See that my client connector is running. This subscribes to everything. And notice it's already getting the information. It's received 3 messages so far. So pretty easy to configure the SQL adapter to publish information into Neuron, or to be able to subscribe to information from Neuron and send that to do operations on the database, whether it's insert, updates, leads, or select statements. Now, if I had to pass in parameters, some of these adapters, actually many of them, take certain connection parameters. You can do that as well. If I looked under here, under typed, you'll notice that the URL here is a little different. Anytime you're using a typed poll, you have to pass in the inbound ID to make it unique. And how we do that in Neuron is, here is the URL. To pass in the parameter, you simply do a comma, do the URL again with the param. So hence, if you had 2 params that you would pass, again, it would just simply be, great, I've got it. Go ahead and add it in. So it's a great way to pass this in. So that was it on these SQL, specifically the WCF line of business adapters. Just a little summary. You create them under adapters, and all you're doing here is you're populating the properties, the binding properties. And everything on this binding tab is used at runtime when you create a service endpoint. You can also add connection information. So then choose Windows, and you can actually import in metadata schemas. That's not required. You can use them for validating a message and transforming them, but we don't do anything else with those. They're never compiled. They can change. Once you create these, you simply create service endpoints, either client connectors, which are web service on-ramps hosted by Neuron, or service endpoints that send information out to. And you simply select the binding that you created in the adapter section. Pretty simple. Okay. Fantastic. Let's go back to the presentation. Next on our list, we wanted to walk through Neuron Pipelines. Now, pipelines within Neuron are incredibly extensible. You can use these for business logic, anything you need to do real time, manipulating the message, any kind of complex message processing. But you can do quite a bit more. Besides our functional steps, there's also a code step. You can change the message. You can also send metadata through the system and use that for processing. There's also a way where you can actually take a pipeline and expose that as a web service without publishing any information to the bus at all. Now that can come in handy. That can come in pretty handy if you simply have some complex logic and you just want to expose that as a web service, and you really don't have a need to publish it to the bus because maybe that pipeline is already calling a number of services and inserting things into a database and doing some other work. So let's take a look and see what that could be. So we have this. We have our current ESB config file up. So let's go ahead and do a few things. Let's first create a topic. Pretty easy. We'll create a services topic. Maybe a processor subtopic. No rhyme or reason to naming convention right now. Fantastic. It's just using the default network, TCP. And I probably want to create a publisher. That can publish and subscribe to that processor. And for testing purposes, you know, I may very well want to create a subscriber. So let's go ahead and do that. Make sure I have this completed. Fantastic. No pipeline yet. And I'll just create a subscriber. It'll do the same thing. All right, so far, pretty easy to do. Now what I might want to do is create a pipeline. Oh, folks, someone just, my apologies, someone just reminded me that my screen wasn't showing. Let me go back a step. First, I created the services topic with a subtopic called processor. I used the default network, TCP. From there, I created a publisher called services publisher that can send and receive on services.processor topic. Nothing else associated with it. And then I created a test subscriber. Pretty much the same properties, nothing associated with it. It can send and receive on services processor as well. So, now I'll create a pipeline. Let me go into pipelines. Here's a new one. I'll just call it process message. Now pipelines are pretty powerful. You can do quite a few things in them. In this case, I'm just going to use the code step. But notice you can drag and drop, make decisions, add branches, call services, store in the databases and call databases, run things in a transaction, and even do exception handling. So you can do quite a bit within a pipeline. Ours is pretty simple. Remove. Now, what I'm going to do is this. I'm just going to edit the code. And the nice thing within a pipeline, you have access to the entire message. So what do you think I might do? Context.data gives me the message from XML. And I'm basically going to overwrite the existing message and put some information in there. I think that works. Pretty simple. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put a cancel step in. That's all I'm going to do, just cancel step. I'm going to apply. Then I'm going to take that process message and I'm going to associate it with the services publisher. So pipelines, process message on the on-client publish. Now, what that's going to do, I'll just hit apply and save. If I call into the service publishers, the service publisher party, it's going to run that pipeline. It's going to execute the logic, which is overwrite the existing message and return X. But then it's going to do that cancel. And what cancel means is do not publish the message to the bus. Just return the result. So pretty easy at that point. Let me make sure I have this set up. Now let's go ahead and go into visualstudio.net. Now in Visual Studio, I've referenced the Neuron ESB libraries, so I can use our publisher objects and pretty much do whatever I want. So let's go ahead, publisher pub equals new publisher. And that publisher is this guy. Fantastic. First thing I need to do is connect to the bus. Great. Next thing I need to do is I'm going to basically the message equals publisher.send. And XML, and I can use the topic here. In fact, let me make sure that's the right one. Nothing like copy and paste, it's your friend. And I should go ahead and send in an XML fragment. And I should also send in the semantic. And this is going to be a request. Easy enough to do. String, perfect. So here, all I'm doing is I'm created a reference to the publisher object, I'm connecting to the bus, I'm sending a message to this subtopic using this publisher, and this is my message, and I'm saying this is a request response message. Now what's going to happen, it's going to get submitted to that topic, or actually it's going to be submitted via the publisher. What's going to happen is the pipeline is going to run first. It's going to replace that message, provide me a reply message, and then cancel publication in the bus. So I should get that reply message here, and then it just writes to the screen. So let's test this and see if it works. Let's make sure things are saved here. Great. Now I tend to look at the event log a lot. Great. And let's just go ahead and run this. And notice this is my reply message. And hence nothing got written to the bus. And we can actually look at that. Let's disconnect. And let's go into Services Subscriber. Let's clear that out. Let's run this again. And no message got published in the bus. So that's great. What if I wanted to just expose that as a web service? I should be able to do that. It should be fairly easy to do. So let's try that out. I basically have this pipeline process message, and this could have this code shape in it. It could have anything before it. It could have the decision shapes, calling databases, services, whatever I want. And now what I'm doing is, let's expose that as a web service. So on service endpoint, processing service. Now we could pick anything here, maybe WSHTTP. This is going to be request response. Let's go message windows. And on client connector, I'll enable this. I'll use the service publisher, processor, and the URI, localhost, and let's say it's going to be 7890. Fantastic. Hit that, hit save. Now what I've done, I've just exposed this as a web service. So let me just go in here real quick. Now, in here, what we need to do is simply call that web service using WCF. Now, I already have some client connector code written up here, so I'm just going to copy and paste some of this out. Let's go here. We're done. Let's go here. We don't need the message header. And let's just change the URL. So here, all I'm doing is creating a channel factory. I request type agnostic using a WSHTTP binding. My endpoint is the endpoint hosted by Neuron. Created the channel, sending the message, and I should get that same request message back, or the response message. So I have my test client up, still nothing submitting. If I go ahead and run this, notice, hi mom, this is my reply. I got my reply message back, and nothing got submitted to the bus. So again, it's one way to take a pipeline and say, great, I just want to expose this as a web service, and I'm done. Pretty easy to do. So let's go ahead and remove this. Now, some other things that you can do too is you can add metadata to these things. So I just did this. Some of the things that we can do if we're publishing. Perfect. So if we really are publishing, we can always add metadata to this. Here is ESB message, and I'm doing a send XML. Well, I can always create another ESB message. Message. Let's do this as the request message. Fantastic. Request message. Let's go header.topic. We know we're going to submit it here. Great. And let's from XML. Let's get our XML in here. And let's set the semantic. Request. And we can also set the action, which we're currently not using. There we go. Now, once we do that, we can also say, great, I want to add some context properties to this. So I could do something like message.setProperty. With prefix, neuron, prop, and some value. Perfect. Pretty simple to do. And now instead of send XML, I can do something as simple as send message. Just like that. And that works. Now, if I want to intercept that message here in a pipeline, pretty simple to do. Value equals context dot data dot get property neuron, and I think that's little case, prop. Let me just confirm that is the case. Perfect. And then I could simply say, great, system.diagnostics. Log, write entry, pipeline test, value, entry type. Let's do a warning so we'll see it, and pretty much done. So here I'm just retrieving the value and then just writing it out. So let's go ahead, hit apply, hit save. Let's go ahead and run this. Start. Fantastic, and hence I can also retrieve custom properties, write those, or even use those for, say, doing more complex processing within the pipeline itself. Now, you can also add SOAP headers if you're using client connectors, and then retrieve those SOAP headers within the pipeline as well. So let's go ahead, close this down. Let's go back to our presentation. Here we are. Okay, so lots of good things with pipelines that you can do. Now services, this is Our core strength, services, integration and services. Now, with Neuron, you can do a lot of things. We handle, obviously, providing things like generic on-ramps, those client connectors. We also provide things like protocol mediation. So you might have back-end services, basic HTTP, but you need to, say, you need to expose all those as WSHTTP. Very easy to do. Being type agnostic means that you can throw anything at us on the front end. We host our client services, and now you can do things like dynamic routing. You can start thinking about interesting patterns. You can start routing the different services based on action, metadata, or even content of the message. And some of the things that you have to remember, though, mapping the topics to services. Because that's how you're going to do some routing. And there's also some other interesting things that you can do for routing as well that I'm going to show you. Now for this, I'm actually going to use a different ESB config file. I'm going to bring this up. I'm simply going to restart now. Fantastic. Services tend to be very easy with Neuron. One of our core strengths. Let me close this and open this in runtime mode. There we go. Sorry, folks, we're back to the ESB Explorer. I basically am opening up now our new config. Notice this one, different topics. I basically have services, and here I'm going to show you a routing scenario. I've created a services topic, and you may very well create topics that are more in line with, say, an organizational hierarchy or more business requirements. These are more functional. So here I have services one-way, services two-way. From this, you can suppose that we'll have service endpoints, one-way service endpoints and two-way service endpoints, and they'll be mapped to these. I have a service publisher, pretty much publish anything, and two-way subscribers. If I look at connections, let's take a look at this. I basically have two on-ramps. Both are WSHTTP. One handles one-way service requests, so you can throw any document in it, any XML, basically anything at it. It's type agnostic, but it's a one-way, and the other is two-way. And notice the configuration of each. I'm just using the client connector. So it's using the service publisher, publishing just to the services topic on this URL. If I take a look at the two-way service, same thing. It's using the service publisher, just publishing to the services topic on this. But now if we take a look at the service connectors I've created, I have a one-way and I have a two-way. If I take a look at the one-way service connector, first, it's binding as datagram, and it's using WSHTTP binding, but notice it's using the one-way subscriber, which means it doesn't subscribe to the services topic, it subscribes to the services.one-way topic. And if I take a look at the two-way service, well, this is using the two-way subscriber, which subscribes to services.two-way topic, not the services topic. So as it is, if I don't have some sort of routing mechanism in the middle, if I submit messages to any of my client connectors, these on-ramps, these back-end services will never get it. So I need to build some routing into a pipeline. Now, notice this is also basic HTTP, so I'm doing protocol mediation at that point. Now, if I take a look at my pipeline, I have a simple router. And all I'm doing here is I'm routing based off the semantic of the inbound message. So if the message comes in on the on-ramp, on the one-way on-ramp, I'm simply going to flip the topic on that message to the services.oneway, which that one service connector will be listening to. Otherwise, I'm going to flip the topic to two-way. Now we can test this fairly easily. Let me go ahead and launch the services. So these are two WCF services I've launched, each pretty simple. All they do is receive a message and write it to the console, and on the two-way service, it'll actually send me back a reply. Let's wait for this level one to spin up. Here we go. Now, in Visual Studio, let's go ahead and remove this. I already have code written to call our client connectors. And if we take a look at the code fairly quickly, it's simple. I'm doing the request first. I'm just adding some metadata here, even though I'm not using it. And in this case, I'm calling the I output, so that's a datagram. So these are submitting to our client connectors, basically the services, the generic on-ramps hosted by Neuron, each one of these. Now Neuron's going to receive these messages, and based off of something in that message or context, right, that pipeline, that routing pipeline has to determine which service it goes to. And what I've done is I've mapped each service to a subtopic. So by simply flipping the topic, I can route that. So now if I run this, let me do this, debug. Just give this a second. Notice the two-way service got it, and the one-way service got the message. And it's the right one. Hello datagram, hello two-way, and I got my two-way response. So pretty simple to do. Now that's one example of routing a message. Now, there may be cases where I want to circumvent the bus altogether. In other words, there's always overhead when you put a bus in the middle of services. Now, putting a bus in the middle of this, in the middle of the on-ramp versus the service it's going to, allows you to do some great things. You can add another subscriber, and that subscriber could represent an SAP system, an Oracle system, right? And it doesn't affect anything else. It's very easy to intercept and do things with these messages flowing across a bus. But I may want to just do something like this. Context.data. A property. And let's do direct connect. And this is going to be, let's make sure I have the spelling correct here. Give me a second. Two-way echo service and one-way echo service. Let me go back into pipelines. Echo service. Fantastic. I'll comment this out. And this is going to be one way. Notice what I'm doing here. I'm setting a special Neuron property. And basically what it's saying is just call the service directly, circumvent pub sub. And how we confirm that we're circumventing pub sub, we'll put a cancel here. So no message will actually be published to the bus when this routing pipeline gets called by the publishing service. So I'll go ahead and apply. I'll save this. Fantastic. Give this just a second to catch on. And I'll go ahead and run this. It's kind of nice too. I can make these edits to the pipeline and notice it all works, and it's also going to be a lot faster. What's great about this too is I can make all these edits to the pipeline without having to restart a lot of services. Actually, I don't have to restart any, which is very nice. So let's go back to the presentation. And I think we're almost out of time here in our last subject. Troubleshooting, neuron logs, auditing and failed message routing, and WCF tracing. So here, very easy to configure these and very useful information. So let me go back to my desktop, go into Neuron and show you some of this. First of all, you have to remember, always look at the event logs. We write everything to either the Neuron ESB or the application. So you'll always see these. Next, for information that you can use, you have trace level. Right, by default, it's errors and warnings. You can set verbose. If you set verbose, you will see messages going through service connectors, through our service connectors, client connectors. You will see a lot of information that will help you troubleshoot. If you choose enable WCF tracing, we will actually write out WCF trace logs, and they will be rather large. So let's go ahead and do this. Now let's go ahead too and enable auditing. Maybe I want to also track messages as they go through the system. Pretty easy to do. First thing I would do is just create a database. Host, tracking, give it to the deployment group, hit apply. That'll actually create the database for you. And once the database is created, I can simply go to the topics and enable auditing directly on the topic. Here we go. Pretty easy to do. And if I want to make sure failures on the service connectors are put in the failed database, I simply go to Service and Adapter Policies and make sure that that option under Failure Action is always set to Log to Database. And all my endpoints are using that policy. So once I do that, fantastic, I saved everything. Let me restart. You have to restart if you reset anything under Configure Server. We'll run some messages through and we can show you that information. Looks like things are starting up. Fantastic. So now let me just run some information through. Notice I don't have any services up. Hence, it should be fairly hard to route services that aren't running. Fantastic. Got an error. So the first thing you should see, error information in the event log. Always helpful. Now, if I go and look under logs, this is the log subdirectory under the Neuron install. We create a folder every time you restart the Neuron service. So the latest one will be on the bottom. So here, we have topics, we have service connectors, and we have the publishing services and client connectors. I can go into log, I can see the information. I can go into service connectors. I can see the information that we tried to send, and I can see all the error information as well. So you'll always be able to track the information that you might need to diagnose through these logs if you have verbose settings on. Now, since I also had WCF tracing enabled, it means we can bring up the WCF trace logs. You can look through these and actually look at the errors and get more detailed WCF information. I hope that makes sense to everyone. And because we had auditing on, besides seeing the endpoint health and seeing everything that's happening, I can see there were errors on the service connector or the client connector, service connector. I can see who's connected currently to the bus. And because these never got published, nothing there. However, if I just simply go ahead, pipeline, remove, edit, go back, hit save, apply, save, launch the services. I can go ahead and get this. And now in activity, I should see some message history. And in this case, I can say to this, I can view the message, view related messages, and see all the metadata associated with this. All right, let's go back here. So, what we showed you today was our Neudesic support for WCF line of business adapters, how you would configure those, how you would add the properties to the URI when you had to, how you could do both send and receive, how Neuron hosts these, how you can generate schemas, and the nice thing, you're not having to compile anything into assemblies. No references to break, just a nice experience. Showed you pipelines. You can use pipelines for routing and mediation. You can change the data completely. You can expose these as services. You can actually prevent them from publishing to the bus altogether. Neuron with services provides a superior intermediary router. You can even circumvent publishing to the bus when you're calling services. You can create generic on-ramps. And enabling tracing, auditing, and failed message support, very easy to do. So you should have lots of information to diagnose issues. So for more information, you can visit our website. We have data sheets, white papers, and demo videos. We have training material available to you. You can always ping us at Neuron Info, and we can always set up a live demo for you or talk about your projects. And let's open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Marty, for this awesome presentation. We did have a few questions come through. So as a reminder, to ask a question, click on the Q&A verbiage located in the toolbar at the top left side of your screen. Type your question, then click the Ask button. The first question that came through was, what is the current release of Neuron, and when can we expect the next release?
Great question. The current release is 2.5. We obviously have some point releases after that. The current one really is 2.5.7. Our .8 patch will come out shortly. We are planning another release, most likely a dot release before the end of the year, where we plan to support Visual Studio 2010, .NET 4.0, as well as a few other things. And then we are working on a longer roadmap, ideally for a mid-year release next year. But we should be able to post more information on that probably by mid-October.
Thank you, Marty, for the update. The second question was, how can you access environment variables in a pipeline code block?
Can you access environmental variables in a pipeline code block? I'm going to actually say yes to that, only because I know our devs built an API around that specifically for, we had some customers that wanted to be able to use the environmental variables outside of the Neuron UI. So if that API, since that API exists, you should be able to access it. I can, if someone pings me, I can find out and confirm that.
Thanks, Marty. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to type them at this time. In the meantime, I'm going to click through a few polling questions, and we greatly appreciate your feedback. The first question, was this content helpful for your business? Yes or no? Give it a couple more seconds. Great, thank you. Please rate the presentation content. Excellent, good, or poor. All right. And the last question, would you like us to schedule a follow-up? Yes or no? Great, thank you. If there are no further questions, we would like to thank Marty again for the wonderful presentation. Again, we will be forwarding out the recorded version of this presentation when it becomes available. If you have any further questions about this presentation, please feel free to email Marty at the email on the slide that's up right now. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webcast. You are now free to